This is a real story that absolutely traumatized me and my boyfriend. 2 years ago, I moved to the UK for university, as I always wanted to go there and get away from my parents. The situation at home was a bit too toxic for me. In first year at uni, I moved into a student accommodation and met some really great people actually. It was a pretty good year, without even meeting my boyfriend yet, who I'm still with to this day. I was just enjoying my time away from my family and discovering what independence really meant. Anyhow, second year came by, and I decided with some friends to move into a house rented by student accommodations. At least we'd have our own house though, and weren't as restricted with noise and parties and such. Note, I had a ground floor room, and my window looked into a very small backyard in which I would go and smoke every day, as I'm a smoker. There was a very thin wooden door going to the other side of the street where you would put your bins and broken chairs and that sort of thing. The door could only be closed and locked from inside the backyard. Since it was an old door, we had to attach some extra things to keep it closed for good though. I had neighbors on each side of the house, so we were surrounded by families and other student accommodations. The neighbors on the right side of us were 5 boys who looked way over the age of being in university. They were, needless to say, very strange. I even had a moment where I met one of them outside our house one day because of police intervention due to one of their flatmates attacking him and the others with a kitchen knife and burning their kitchen down. I heard some screams and rushed outside with my flatmates, only to see one of them covered in blood and cuts everywhere on his arm, a wound on his head inflicted by the knife as well. We didn't know what to do, so we offered him our help to clean himself and gave him an old t-shirt to change out of his bloody clothes. We saw the guy who'd attacked them all being escorted out by the police and into a van driven off to be arrested. I don't really know anything more about that story. The police didn't tell us anything else, but it was quite strange, needless to say. Anyway, the guy we helped was quite weird as well. He often kept trying to grab me and hold me for some reason. We noticed when helping him he smoked quite a lot of marijuana too. We didn't really care about that at the moment though. We just wanted to make sure he was okay, as we didn't really know him. After some time had passed, I went back to university. When I came home, I would see him quite often just standing in the street. I never said a word to him. One day though, he came up to me when I went to the corner shop and started talking to me. I didn't really feel comfortable talking to him, so I just didn't respond. "Oh, that's how you want to do it. Okay, I'll just wait out in front of your house then, and we can talk then." I was very creeped out. I thought at first he was just joking. I bought my drink at the shop and headed back to my street. As I turned to where my house was, I saw him with his flatmate sitting on my doorstep and waiting for me. I panicked and went back to the corner shop. I called my only male flatmate to ask him to open the door and tell the guys to go away. Unfortunately, he was not home, and no one else was either. I literally had to just wait it out until I saw them finally leave 1 hour later. I sprinted back home while they weren't looking and locked the front door. After this already scary encounter, I just tried to avoid the guy, and mostly I succeeded for a while. One day though, as I went smoking in the backyard, I noticed the wooden door, which had always been closed before, was now open. The things we'd used to keep it closed had been sliced through. For whatever reason, this didn't initially startle me that much. I simply closed the door again and put some new things on it, thinking it must have been one of my flatmates who took the bins out and just didn't tie it back or something. Another thing to note is that those weird neighbors would often scream and yell in their house in the middle of the night. It would always wake us up, but we got kinda used to it after a while. One evening, my boyfriend slept over like he usually did. He, who usually never wakes up because of a noise, woke up in the middle of the night because of a sudden bang and some whispered murmuring. I was still sound asleep, so he very silently woke me up. We waited in the dark together and listened for any other noises. Suddenly, we heard the wooden door shoot open with a bang and footsteps right next to my window. We both froze in place. We heard the door leading to the backyard get shaken softly, as if they were trying to get inside. Then they stopped. Luckily, we had the curtains closed so they couldn't see us. We were ready to get dressed and get the fuck out of the room though. Just then, we heard my window begin to move and open. One of the people outside said something in a different language we didn't understand, and we could hear them trying to get in. My boyfriend and I shot up out of bed, grabbed my phone, put our clothes on, and ran out of the house. I called my flatmates and told them to lock themselves in their rooms. Then I called the police. Luckily, they came in less than 5 minutes, as the headquarters were only a couple of streets down from us. I don't really remember anything after the police came. I think we were both in shock. They ended up only catching one guy. The other fled, and was later found a few streets up smoking some weed. The police told us they went inside of their house, found a lot of meth and heroin. They were also carrying a massive kitchen knife with them. I was confused, as I'd never done anything to offend them, nor done anything wrong to any of my neighbors. The idea of them breaking in with God knows what intentions with a knife to terrorize me and my boyfriend startled me quite a bit. The 2 guys ended up being arrested. One of them was put in prison for 2 years for carrying a weapon with intent to harm. I never heard anything else from the police. I moved back home a few months later as I was really scared. It tormented me for months on end, not knowing what would have happened to me if my boyfriend didn't wake up. I'm now still coping with it and finding it really tough to get over it. I always wake up at the slightest noise and get horrible noises because of it. At least my boyfriend is still awesome though. We often talk about it together, and it helps quite a lot. What I'm about to describe to you might possibly sound like a cheap-ass cliché movie script, but this did indeed happen. Even at home, barely anybody believes me without confirmation from all of the other parties involved. Autumn 2019 in British Columbia, Canada. I'm from Germany, but spent half a year in Canada as part of my bachelor's degree. I just barely managed to get back before COVID hit. I was 22 years old at the time, and the other people involved were about the same age. Another one of the foreign exchange students and I befriended this local Canadian student. We all had the same interests and humor, and we all became very good friends. He told us all about the local area, and we spent a summer with him and his father at their very remote cabin near some woods. They taught us how to handle guns there, and let us shoot a lot as well. When fall came, we had a lot of free time, due to being finished with all our papers. Our buddy proposed that we spend a few days at his dad's cabin, this time without Dad around. We went, hell yeah, we could load up on booze and weed and have a great time there, just living it up. 3 close-ass dudes in the woods, gaming and getting wasted. Sounds great, right? After loading up on all our supplies, the first 3 days were very good. On the first day, just like the last time I was there, I could barely sleep a wink and was generally tense. This is because I'm a naturally very paranoid guy, and I always go into alert mode in various situations. This is often mocked by my friends because nothing ever happened. In this case, what was freaking me out the most was the fact we were so far away from civilization. You never really understand how quiet surroundings can be until you spend some time in a remote area like this. This led to me often just standing in the dark at night, listening to the surroundings of the cabin. After the first few days, I got used to it and got less paranoid. After all, I was with my best friends. I was also constantly high, and we were quite armed and dangerous as well. Probably the most dangerous to ourselves, honestly. Day 4 came by though. We spent the day attempting to hunt in the woods. Mostly that entailed chilling under trees with a beer and rifle in hand. In the evening, it started to rain quite heavily. After an hour, we were starting to see lightning in the distance even. There was quite a bit of time passing between lightning and thunder though, which meant the thunderstorm itself was still quite some ways away. We aborted our incompetent hunting attempts and started trekking our way back to the cabin. It took us about an hour to reach it, due to it already being very dark and the rain creating unsafe footing. For context, you should know that once you've spent a few days in the wilderness and haven't seen a soul other than your friends for days, you can become quite careless about your surroundings. We entered the cabin. By the time we'd arrived back, the thunderstorm was full raging. We put away our gear and changed our clothes, except for our guns. We cozied down in the living room at the table and started a YouTube video and began to play cards together. Barely 20 minutes had passed since we returned. At the time, we didn't bother closing the curtains in the living room because thunderstorms are baller as fuck. So just imagine 3 guys sitting around a table laughing and in awe at the weather outside while playing cards together. In such a remote place, it was extremely dark outside. Without a full moon or clear skies, it was pitch black. My friend initially saw this. While sipping from his beer, a flash of lightning went off. He spit it out after the lightning came down. He screamed loudly and stood up. No words, just the sound of panic. "There's somebody outside!" He started rambling about how in that split second, the lightning illuminated the outside of the cabin. He'd seen a person standing in the distance, hiding behind a tree and looking directly at us. This is what I meant when I said cliché horror. My non-local friend was in full-on panic. He was quite anxious. I grabbed my rifle and pulled the bolt to rack around into the chamber. I felt that warm sensation down my spine of my body releasing adrenaline. I tried to stay far away from the window and stared out into the darkness outside. Of course, I couldn't see anything. While our Canadian friend rushed into his room to grab his pistol, I started panicking even more because I realized we'd never locked the door. Why would we? We hadn't seen anyone in days and were in the middle of nowhere. I sprinted to the door to lock it. Our friend returned with his pistol, which he'd grabbed because there was a flashlight attached to it. He carefully approached the window and opened it with one hand, the other aiming the gun outside. His flashlight turned on in the darkness. Immediately, it illuminated a man, tall and slim, dressed in all black, in a hooded raincoat which he'd pulled over his face. He was not far away from the cabin, just a few steps away from the window. He was not standing behind something as our friend had yelled earlier, but seemed to be crouching. He looked directly at us and clenched his eyes. He had a terrifying smirk on one side of his mouth. Another lightning flashed, and for that moment we were all frozen. Nobody said anything for a few moments. It's hard to explain the dreadful feeling about seeing something like this. In a storm in the middle of nowhere. A person dressed in all black crouching and approaching you. Our Canadian buddy was aiming his pistol at the frozen, crouched, smirking man. He yelled out with a slight stutter, "Get the fuck away from us! We will shoot!" I guess after that moment his eyes adjusted. The raincoat man realized it was not just a flashlight, but a gun as well. I was standing next to my friend with a hunting rifle of my own. The raincoat man's smirk changed to something I'm unsure of. It was either shock or rage. All this happened in less than a minute. My friend kept on yelling. The raincoat man turned about 90 degrees towards the nearest tree line. He went from a crouch to sprinting like an Olympic runner. He ran away to the right side of our window. The two of us poked our head out the window to see where he was going. In the heavy rainfall and darkness, though, we couldn't make out anything. After a few moments of just looking at each other in disbelief, we decided to pop off a few rounds outside to prove that the guns were real and to cope with our own fear. When the shock wore off, we called the police. They asked a lot of questions on the phone to describe the location of the cabin and a description of the man who'd almost crept up on us, totally unsuspecting, only revealed due to a lucky strike of lightning. Due to us being in a remote area, the cops told us it'd take at least 2 hours for someone to come. Given how the man saw that we were armed, he probably wouldn't come back again. We agreed. We discussed just jumping in the truck and leaving right now. Us dumbasses had been too lazy to refuel it, though. The idea of doing this now in the dark and the heavy rain was just too frightening. We spent the night sleeping in shifts. One person awake standing guard. The others at least attempted to sleep. When my turn came, the rain had died down. I turned off all the lights, opened a window, and sat there in the darkness. It was close to the middle of the next day when 2 cops arrived. We gave them a detailed report of what happened, when it happened, and had to show them which direction the man had run off to. They said they'd organize a patrol to comb through the woods, but that might take a while. Sadly, we hadn't seen any details of the man's face. We couldn't tell if he was old or young, only that he was tall and clean-shaven. The chances of finding who he was or what the hell he was attempting to do were slim to none. One of the officers, though, expressed that this was deeply worrying. We left the cabin a few hours after the police left. The guy's dad insisted we stay at his place for at least a day until we felt safe again. He also wanted to hear every last detail. I never heard from those cops again. Next January, I left Canada and returned home. My Canadian friend was called in for an interview a few months later, though. It seemed like the police were still seriously investigating this, looking for the guy who'd crept up on the cabin during a thunderstorm. We've speculated a lot about what this was. Winning theory is that the guy most certainly had sinister intentions. It didn't look like just an attempted burglary. Remember, we had dim lights on so you could see there was somebody inside. The guy was also creeping during a thunderstorm. I suspect the raincoat man wanted to check what kind of victim was on the menu. I really don't want to imagine what he had in mind if we were two unarmed girls instead of a pair of armed guys in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. We hadn't seen any headlights during our stay there, and the guy also had no backpack or any gear. I'd bet my soul because of this that this guy was a man on a mission who knew exactly what he was doing and was well prepared for it. I've been having a super lousy few months, and this is kind of just the shit cherry on top. I was walking back from work yesterday to meet my spouse at home, where we have an apartment together. It's getting dark earlier again these days, so it was quite close to fully dark as I was walking through. I'm always on edge when I walk alone already, so I had my key lanyard in my hand. I noticed right away when a guy came out from a side street and crossed the road to walk alongside me. I was already going at a brisk pace and was just a block and a half away from home. As I passed underneath a streetlight, the man called out to me. I ignored him. He called out again. I ignored once more. He began to get quite angry. "What's your problem?" Without turning around or slowing down, I just shouted out I wasn't interested over my shoulder and walked even faster. The man got even angrier though. "Don't be such a bitch." He sounded extremely angry. At this point, I just thought to myself, man, fuck this. I'm not dealing with this tonight. I broke out into a sprint down the street toward my building. The man screamed after me, and I heard his feet pounding on the sidewalk behind me. I made it to the front door of my building, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut. I jammed my key into the locked lobby entrance, yanked that open, sped through, and slammed that shut too. The front lobby walls are made of glass, and you could very clearly see inside. I figured having these locked doors would deter him. I speed walked through the lobby anyway and to the stairs just in case. A few male neighbors I'm acquainted and friendly with were sitting in the lobby chatting. I waved and said hi to them. I guess I'm very lucky they were there. The locked door didn't stop him at all. Instead, I heard a massive shattering smash. I nearly shit my heart out, and my neighbors started yelling. I whipped around to see that this asshole had kicked or punched the door in, shattering most of it. He was now trying to reach through and let himself in. I shouted to the neighbors, "That man followed me here. I don't know him." I booked it up the stairs and ran all the way to my apartment. I could hear shouting and fighting even when I got into my place. I told my spouse right away what happened. We called 911 as well. The cops came to our building and one spoke to me briefly. A search was conducted for the man, who'd apparently run away when he saw my neighbors angry and approaching him. We got a follow-up visit a couple of hours later for a different cop. Turns out the dumbass had cut himself on the door, so it was easy to grab him once they found out who he was. Apparently, this wasn't his first time hanging around my complex. He was known to the cops as an addict who followed people around asking for money. He was also suspected of buying from dealers in our complex, but had never been caught. How unlucky for him, I guess. I guess I shouldn't even be surprised, though. It's not a good place, not a good building, just something we can afford until we can move on to better. For fuck's sake, though, I'm so tired of living that way. This happened Sunday night. I got into a very huge fight with my mom. It was very emotional and intense, to say the very least. We made up and said goodnight to each other, blah blah blah, but I was still very pissed off. In my impulsive mood, I decided I was going to take off for the night. I just wanted to cool off for a bit, really. I went into my backyard and hopped over one of our walls and started to walk around. Mind you, it was midnight and I'm a teenage girl that's quite on the skinny side. It was also a not so well lit area. I didn't even have my phone in case something happened, or a weapon for self-protection, which was quite stupid of me honestly. For a bit more layout of the story as well, just down the street from my house, which is a neighborhood road, there's a church and a preschool across from it. In front of the preschool, there are large, tall hedges that sort of hide the pickup and drop-off area that's in front of the school. There's a stop sign on the church's corner before the busy main road, and a street lamp on that same corner. I was making my way down the corner on the church's side. I was very bored and cold, but it's not like I could call a friend to come pick me up and hang out or something. I decided to face the main road and put a hitchhiker's thumb up in hopes of someone pulling into the street and letting me use their phone to call a friend. After what felt like hours and hours, getting no such luck, I saw a guy from across the main road and called out to him. I didn't have any weird feelings about this guy. Actually, he was quite nice and let me use his phone. I still wasn't able to find any of my friends to come and get me though. Before the man turned to leave though, he asked me if I had anything on me for protection. He said he was quite worried because I was all alone and it was so late at night. I told him I'd honestly forgotten it at home. He handed me a small sharp switchblade and told me to keep it and stay safe, and to have a good rest of the night. After watching the man walk off into the dark heading east, I wandered up and down the sidewalk as cars passed by. I was just about getting tired of this and started to pass the hedges when I glanced over to the left of me where the school was. In that moment, I saw the large silhouette of a man slowly creeping around the front doors to the small preschool. The man was quite big. He was hidden in the darkness as well. It took me about 2 seconds to realize the man had stopped in place and had seen me too. I went into flight mode immediately. I immediately noped the hell out of there and ran across the normally busy street. It happened to be empty at that moment. I could hear him sprinting behind me. I kept on running until I was 5 streets down and realized finally he was not following me anymore. About 30 minutes had gone by. I decided it was about time to make my way home. Eventually, I crossed the street and was facing the main road walking down to the church. I took a left and went to get home. It was silent, and no cars had gone by for a few minutes at that point. Then though, I heard a car speeding down the road. I turned my head back to see a large white Suburban. I dismissed it at first, thinking nothing of it as it turned right a few streets down. Across the road. I just started to turn the corner under the street lamp when I looked back up again. I saw that car starting to come out of the same road it had just turned onto. I'm not sure why, or how my gut was telling me to run, but I did. I ran into a nearby parking lot. I threw myself on the ground behind a ramp wall that was barely tall enough to hide me. Next thing I knew, I was about to cry because of how freaked out I was. I was trying to stay silent at the same time. I could see the Suburban's headlights reflecting off the walls of the building nearby as it pulled into the parking lot as well. It made a few laps around from what I could sneak a peek of and stopped in the middle for a couple of minutes. Eventually, it turned out and drove into the main road though. I waited a bit longer and pulled the knife out, listening for anything or everything. Eventually, I realized I was probably in the clear, and I ran back home without further incident. I'm not sure exactly what was going on there, but I'm sure it was up to no good.